It's the week ending Saturday, the 15th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen a furore in Britain over the Prime Minister attending yet another party during lockdown at 10 Downing Street. At least 19 people killed and more than 60 injured in New York's worst residential fire in decades, and the death of legendary actor Sidney Poitier at the age of 94. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today, we are blessed to have Suchandrika Chakrabarti and Abdulwahab Tahhan. But who cares about that when we have a shiny new addition to the Week Unwrapped team as well? It is the news editor at Goal, Emma Smith. Hi, Emma.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Welcome to the show. Now, Goal is a football news website, so it'll come as no surprise to our regulars that I've never read it. What am I missing?
Well, Goal is the world's biggest dedicated football website. We've got teams all over the world. You are missing out on the ultimate location for football news and views. Right.
Well, as it is tradition on this show, the thing I'm really interested in is I'm now going to ask you to tell us one thing that we wouldn't be able to find out if we Googled you.
Yes, this is the part that has terrified me most about coming on the show.
I'm glad to have established this tradition in such a short time.
After scouring, interesting fact, I was once a contestant on Mastermind, the long-running BBC television show.
That is interesting. Specialist subject?
Specialist subject was Middlesbrough Football Club, the team that I support.
Love it. So Chandrika, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Well, sorry, dogs, we've got a new best friend. It's pigs.
It is a game changer because, now we will have these organs readily available. If this works, and I hope it will work, we'll have these organs available. We can, we have the technique of genetically modifying. So if there are more tweaking required for modifying the genes, we will be able to do that, and can customize basically the heart for or the organ for the patient.
Dr. Mohammed Muhiuddin, Scientific Director of the University of Maryland's Animal to Human Transplant Program, speaking on Monday. Suchandrika, what's the story?
So a US man has become the first person in the whole world to get a heart transplant from a genetically modified pig. This is something called xenotransplantation, when it's non-human tissues, organs, cells being transplanted into a human. So the patient is David Bennett. He's 57. He's doing well 4 days after the experimental 7-hour procedure, which took place in Baltimore in the US. And doctors at the University of Maryland Medical Center were granted special dispensation by the US medical regulator to do this experimental surgery because it's risky.
Why now, though? And why on Dave Bennett?
So David, he has terminal heart disease and he was on the transplant list, but he was very likely to die. And that's who we're really looking at in terms of patients who will be getting these kind of transplants in the future, which we'll get onto, is that it's people who are sort of languishing on the organ transplant list. Like right now, 100,000 Americans are on a wait list for an organ transplant, and about 6,000 die every year while waiting. And if we think about the UK, which is much smaller, it's still really horrifying numbers. There are 7,000 people on the UK transplant waiting list, and at least one person dies every single day while waiting for a match.
Abdul, organ shortage is a huge issue in the US and in many other countries as well, including the UK. Do you think this is the future?
This is not really the future for now because this is still very experimental thing. The pigs were genetically modified by a company. It's the same company that made Dolly in 1996. It's still a very, very new technology, and this pig has been developed after 10 tries, where they defined their DNA and inserted some code and removed some issues because the body would usually resist foreign tissues and foreign organs. Back in the 1980s, there were a couple of tries. A baboon heart was given to a kid, but the kid died after 21 days. Not a kid, it's a newborn. But the newborn baby died after 21 days, so everything has been suspended. But in the UK, I think it's really difficult to see it happening soon before the US, which is leading this new technology.
And that gene editing of the pig, Emma, You know, it's not to improve anything about the pig's life or the pig's genetic build. It's to make it so that its organs are compatible with ours. That brings its own ethical issues, doesn't it? Organ harvesting a genetically modified creature that only exists so you can harvest it.
Absolutely. Obviously, you can look at the ethical issues from the human side of things, and I mean, there was a quote from David Bennett that I saw, which was, "It was either die or do this transplant," which I think, considering the cues that Suchandrika mentioned, and you know, the idea of your own life being at stake, is certainly the attitude I would take. But look at it from the animal rights issue and sort of what state the pigs are being kept in, and they are being raised in a controlled, biosealed environment with this genetic modification to make their organs compatible with humans for transplant. And I suppose your view on animal rights will make you decide whether or not this is humane treatment or not. I think, again, looking at it from the idea of if I would need a transplant like this, the attitude I would take is that I would want any option available to me in order to live a healthy life. But there certainly is the ethical quandary of raising these animals in order to simply harvest their organs whenever needed.
And so, Chandrika, looking around the online conversation around this, are there people who wouldn't say, yes, I'd like that heart? I've seen some people theorising that Jewish people and Muslim people in particular would feel uncomfortable about taking a heart from a pig of all animals.
Yeah, it's really interesting, wasn't it? The BBC had a piece on ethics around this development, and they went to leaders in those communities with Jewish and Muslim patients and sort of put that question to them. And both the people they spoke to said that although Jewish law forbids Jews from raising or eating pigs, receiving a pig heart is not in violation of these dietary laws.
Yeah, they hadn't thought about that 5,500 years ago. That wasn't part of the writing.
It wasn't going to happen then. And then for Islam, there's a similar bottom line that animal material is permitted to be used if it can save a person's life, but it is left down to each patient whether they interpret their religion in the same way, doesn't it? So their beliefs can still stand in the way of them saying yes to this very experimental work. And so doctors don't want those particular patients to be dropping down the transplant list because they say it isn't fair. But at the same time, if there's a scarcity of organs, this could be something that leads to people not getting the treatment they need in the time that they need to get it.
And it isn't a fait accompli, this, is it? There still could be complications from this procedure, Abdul. We don't know that this is going to be successful. We just know it hasn't been rejected in the first week.
It hasn't been rejected in the first week. Actually, it hasn't been rejected only the first 4 days. And the Mr. Bennett is now breathing on his own, but the doctors are still monitoring him to see how he copes with that. But as I said before, the baboon heart only survived for 21 days. So we still really don't know. But the thing I wanted to actually comment on is what Suchandrika said about religious leaders. A lot of religious leaders would really interpret that as they go. Some would oppose it, some wouldn't. One of the very outrageous religious rulings we have in Islam a couple of years ago, where it said that if a woman is alone in a room with a man, it's not allowed in Islam. So she can breastfeed her colleague 5 times, and it has to be recorded. And that was a religious ruling that guys can breastfeed 5 times. So if you can find this in some religious rulings, I'm sure you will find some people who would agree or disagree for a pig's, whether it's a heart or another organ.
Would you take one, Abdul? Would you take an organ from a pig?
Would I take it depends which organ. If it's a heart and I need a heart and that's the only one available, yes.
Do you think it's important, Emma, that you view it as just a pump? I saw one of the medics describe it as, the heart is just a pump. That requires a certain way of looking at the world, doesn't it? Like a surgeon's way of looking at the world, to think of your own organs that way, whereas other people think their organs are given them to them by God, they're created by their parents through a magical process giving life to them. They just can't imagine any foreign object, never mind a pig's heart.
Yeah, I mean, I take a very logical view on it, that basically it's a way of making sure that I'm able to sort of, if I was in that situation, to be able to actually live a full and healthy life. And so it could be a human heart, pig heart, artificial heart, anything that would allow sort of like to be able to continue to live and breathe.
It's also expensive, Suchandrika. Like, obviously expensive at the moment because it's required over $1 million of research to get to the point where we can harvest a pig's organ. I guess that becomes cheaper if you're in the future making thousands of them, obviously. But nonetheless, you've got a company then who's kind of copyrighted this heart. You know, is the NHS ever going to be able to afford it compared to using human-to-human transplant?
That's a really good question, isn't it? Because I think right now, as Abdul's mentioned, it's really early on. And because this experiment seems to be going well, I mean, it's only 4 days in, but fingers crossed that David Bennett remains healthy. I think lots of people are saying lots of things and being very hopeful and wanting to say, yes, we could have this in the future. So you've got the lead surgeon who's saying, Dr. Bartley Griffith, he's saying it's a real stunner in terms of the broader implications for the future of medicine. He's saying if we can be successful with this experiment, there'll be plentiful organs. We can expand wellness to much broader group of patients. They can have hearts on demand. Now that does seem like a big prediction to make, like right now. And then the NHS did have a spokesperson speak to the Daily Mail saying they're watching the US case with interest. And then Professor Gabriel Oniscu, who's the director at the Edinburgh Transplant Centre, he said the procedures could be mainstream within a decade. But I agree with you that, like, what is the cost behind this? And you know, something like the NHS and NICE, they look at the cost benefit analysis. Are they going to decide that this is worth going ahead with?
Particularly when this appears to be basically for patients who can't take a normal heart, quote unquote. You know, they've run out of options. So you're spending more on them.
Yeah, you're kind of looking at what quality of life are these patients going to have? Because to begin with, they have very low quality of life. Will this transplant really give them back that much, or is it extending their lifespan but with a very low quality of life? And so I think we'll really be following David Bennett's case with a lot of interest, because you want him to be well and living a full life and to really be giving hope to other people in his situation.
I mean, obviously, Abdul, it's kind of our job to ask, you know, ethical questions and ask about the animals and ask about religious groups and all the rest of it. I mean, the bottom line is this is amazing science, isn't it? That sort of seems to be what most surgeons are saying when you see them interviewed. They actually seem to be saying, wow, this has happened a lot more quickly than we ever thought. We've been talking about this for 30 years. I hadn't predicted 2022 would be the year. It is quite exciting, isn't it?
It is quite exciting, especially knowing that the coronavirus most likely came from another animal. So to find hope in this animal is really awesome thing to hear. But I think one of the doctors said that it's really bad if we look at the animals and to see them as organ donors, but we eat them anyway. So it's I don't know, it's less harmful if we use them as organs than if we eat them, we use them as food. But yeah, it's definitely awesome thing, and I'm really glad that I'm still young, in my 30s, that maybe when I'm in my 60s or I need some organs or anything, or hip replacement, maybe I get a horse.
I'm not sure I would want to eat the sausages from a pig that had been genetically engineered to provide a heart, though. I'd probably draw the line there on the nose to tail eating.
Abdul to have a horse hip. I am pro that.
Right, Abdul, you're up next after this. Okay, Abdul, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Names were redacted for anonymity.
The goal is to maintain a high level of teaching quality and to continuously advance it. That's why we use course evaluations. This is done, for example, with the questionnaires, where you ask about your opinion of your courses. The results are processed by the evaluation office and remain anonymous at all times.
A promotional video about course evaluation on YouTube from the University of Bern in Switzerland from March last year. Abdul, what's happened this week?
So course evaluations in many universities in Australia and other places other than England have released their course evaluation. And course evaluation are collected for every course taught at the university and given to students to write comments anonymously. So all their comments, everything they write is anonymous. You cannot really track it down. However, there was a lot of anger from academics about this process because a lot of students wrote very, very hateful messages. Insults such as dinosaur, idiot, loser, trash, senile shit, bitch, crap, that fucking dyke, bitch, failed me, must be fucking useless, and such things. Now,
and just to be clear, so these comments are given in the context of students at a university, undergraduates presumably, being asked to give feedback on the professionals teaching their course, and this is what they've written.
Yes, well, both undergrads and postgrads can write whatever they want, and they stay anonymous. In my university, I received my comments evaluation 2 days ago. Some of them said that I am boring, which is very difficult because my classes are so much fun, happen to be. Boring. But some other teachers received very bad evaluations. One of them said, this teacher does not understand local culture. And this teacher is teaching academic English, so it's not really teaching local culture.
So did they take that to be a masked insult about their heritage rather than an actually useful piece of information about how they're teaching the course?
Well, it's not useful. It has nothing to do with the course, because when you're teaching, for example, English language writing, you're not really involved in culture. You're not talking about local culture. If the course you're teaching is local culture or religious, then that's fine. But some of my colleagues received even swearing, so people were swearing at them. One of the comments that I got really upset one of my colleagues particularly is that when he took 2 days off to attend his grandfather's funeral, and then the student wrote, this person took 2 days off. If he was a good Samaritan, he would make up our classes, and this guy is not even religious, so why would he be a Samaritan?
Okay, so I can see why this story resonates with you, and thank you for flagging it up, because I'm sure none of us would have noticed it otherwise. You can read the whole thing, by the way, on the website The Conversation, where they've got a real deep dive into these kinds of student feedback forms. But Emma, regardless of the feelings of the academics who are on the receiving end of this, don't students deserve a say? I mean, that is why these forms exist, is so that you can say at the end of a year of tuition that you've paid for what the quality of it was like, and occasionally, just in human nature, you're going to get some people writing some nasty things.
Of course. But I mean, I was pretty shocked by this because when I was at university, you get asked for feedback on teachers or lecturers, and it never occurred to me to send this kind of abuse, because it's obviously you can have feedback about the quality of lectures, quality of classes, quality of education, that's fine, but so much of this abuse on the Conversation website, and as Abdul mentions, are simply based around personal abuse. Comments about the appearance of lecturers, about the assumed gender or sexuality of lecturers.
Yeah, there's stuff like, my lecturer had such short hair that, as Abdul quoted, she's a dyke. As if, in any case, that's relevant to how they're teaching the course, but obviously that's an abusive way to put it anyway.
Exactly, and I mean, there is personal insults, and they particularly seem to revolve around LGBTQ plus lecturers talking about, this lecturer has no sympathy for students not supporting LGBTQ ideology. Use the word ideology, like talking about she looks like a man professor. Talk about attacking people's gender identity. It's the opportunity to give feedback from students is important, but the fact that so much of it has been used to make these personal attacks, it really makes you wonder what the value of this kind of thing is if it's being abused in such a way.
Would you agree, Suchandrika? It makes you wonder what the value is? Because again, I return to my point. It's there to provide a forum for people to give feedback. That is important. And this is only going to be a minority of respondents.
Yeah, so in a year and a bit of remote teaching, it has been really hard to build those relationships and to get that feedback from students. So I teach, I train people, I've done it over Zoom, done it in real life. And in real life, it's a bit like stand-up, like you get back the energy from the class, you know how they're feeling, you can see their faces. With Zoom, that's not always the case. So you do need this kind of even more at the moment. But as Emma and Abdul have pointed out, it can really be abused, this anonymous commenting. And it's something we see across the internet, right? That when people are anonymous, they feel they have this power to say whatever they want and to attack and to say unkind things. And I think actually this has a lot to do with power and the fact that university educations have become more of a business transaction because people are paying so much for their educations. They have not been getting perhaps that value during the pandemic in many, many ways. And students do have a lot to complain about, but it's easier to complain about a person whose face you see every day, as opposed to complaining about the system. And also, it made me think, and I'm not trying to minimize this, I think it's a really big issue, and I'm glad that Abdul brought it up, but it made me think of the Imagine video by Gal Gadot from the remember back in the prehistoric pandemic times?
I do. Why did you have to bring that back up repeating on me?
I'm so sorry, don't think about it. But
It took me a year to forget about it.
and loads of therapy. So what's so interesting about the backlash to that video is really about how power works on the internet, right? So all these celebrities got together for no reason. It wasn't for charity. And they made this video, they sang a line each, and we all saw a glimpse into their like amazing, fabulous mansions and swimming pools and gardens. And people really hated it. They were not pleased with these celebrities. And it made me think that online, we have access to all the same tools as celebrities. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're all on TikTok, all four of us. We're on all of these things that the celebrities use as well.
One day that joke will be accurate.
It's tomorrow.
Not,
come on, Olly.
You're the only one still on TikTok. But go on, yeah.
But yeah, so there's this feeling that online we're all sort of on a certain level, but actually in real life there is a power dynamic. And so these students, it feels to me, they're upset by this power dynamic. We pay them. Why are they doing X, Y, Z? When in fact, well, your college tutors do have a level of power. It doesn't have to be over you, but it is to teach you and to train you for the future. But it does call into question, what is a university education for these days? Because many people could argue you can make more money as an influencer. Why do you go straight into that?
Well, the thing is, right, okay, so Abdul, one of the comments that you flagged up personally that you had, very bravely, you said on the show, was that people have found you boring. Now,
same here, mate, sorry.
Now, I'm thinking back to my university days. I was never asked for my opinion about any of my tutors or lecturers. But if I had been, I don't think I'd have been so crass as to point out the ones that were boring and put it that way. But I think I would have, by contrast, said if I found someone entertaining. Because actually, I did find I learned better when someone was more of a showman and put more effort and emphasis into how they're performing in a lecture. That is a skill sometimes that is sadly lacking, isn't it, from academics who really know their stuff but aren't very good at communicating it. It's a legitimate criticism to say this person is not communicating these ideas in a way that I find compelling. And maybe it is important to receive that feedback as a tutor and think, what could I do to improve that?
Well, that was a very good piece of information, even though I totally disagree with it, because I work a lot on my material and I happen to be very funny. And that's what most of my students wrote anyway, that this is a very funny lecturer. But saying that I'm boring is totally fine. It's your opinion, you're entitled, comedy is subjective. That's totally fine. What is not fine is that hiding behind anonymity and attacking people personally for things that are not related to feedback. So for example, if you say this person, this is a shit person that has no life, how is that a feedback? Just, this is not feedback, but you're hiding behind, because you know that you're anonymous and the university will never be able to track you, then you're able to start these personal attacks. And personal attacks are not acceptable.
Okay, so what's the solution then? Like, if we're all agreed that there should be a format for giving feedback, but anonymity is causing a problem when people are abusive, it seems to me like maybe you should register to use the website. The university should know who you are, but not reveal who you are to the tutor, for example.
Well, university should be able to know, because if you can create a QR code and everyone who uses the QR code is known to the university for impartial reasons, then that is fine. Because once we know that these are personal attacks on people, this is kind of a hate speech, then you will penalize hate speech, because these students would never say it face to face, would never say it in person, because they know they will be penalized in person. So why don't we penalize this when it's written and there's evidence for it?
Well, except I can imagine, Emma, that there are some academics who are quite sensitive to accusations that they are pursuing an agenda. This is something that you see coming up again, isn't it? Oh, this professor makes everything about gay critical theory, or this lecturer makes everything about woke Marxist feminism. And they might take that to be homophobic or racist. And actually, the student genuinely is just saying, you know what, I've signed up for this course and I didn't want every lecture to be about Marxist feminism. And that, again, could be seen as a legitimate complaint that they'd then be fielding accusations of discrimination for.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that without, it's a theoretical argument. You can't say that without sort of like knowing exactly what the course is in question, which is, I suppose, part of the issue with anonymity. I mean, if someone's complaining that, for example, there's too much focus on LGBTQ topics, for example, if it's, say, this was a student in electronic engineering, that would be probably fair enough. If this was, say, a student in English literature and it was and it was a lecture on queer theory, then maybe it would not be a very good which is why sort of having it completely anonymous is an issue, because then you have what look like infantile personal insults.
Okay, I'm going to move us on, but full marks all round. Very compelling, very interesting. Do come again. Emma, you'll be finishing the show after this. Right, Emma, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Have the UK and Ireland scored an own goal?
We are very, very keen to bring football home. Those the words of Boris Johnson as he's given the government's backing for a bid for the World Cup in 2030. And revealed talks are in place to bring more matches from this summer's European Championship to the UK as well. More on that shortly. First, though, to the plans to stage the World Cup in England for the first time since 1966. The Prime Minister has pledged £2.8 million to support a joint bid from the UK and Ireland to host the tournament on its 100th anniversary. Speaking to the Sun newspaper, the Prime Minister said, "We're very, very keen to bring football home in 2030. I do think it's the right place. It's the home of football. It's the right time. It'll be an absolutely wonderful thing for the country."
Mike Wedderburn reporting for Sky Sports News in March last year. Emma, what's the story?
So the bid, as mentioned there, was the UK and Ireland planning a joint world bid for the 2030 World Cup. However, reports in the last week have indicated that this is now being abandoned in favour of the UK and Ireland bidding instead for the 2028 European Championships.
Okay, let me just stop you right there. Before we get on to the details of this particular potential abandonment, how did it come about that Ireland and the UK were bidding together anyway? I think a lot of people may not have noticed that was going on.
Yeah, so England in itself has bid for the World Cup on a number of previous occasions since 1966, bid in 2006, but was beaten by Germany, bid in 2018, but was infamously came last in the bidding process and was beaten by Russia. So there's been a desire to bring the World Cup back to England or Britain for quite some years. The World Cup is expanding. From 2026, it will go from 32 to 48 teams. And so there's a desire, so the idea of bidding is now sort of been, was expanded to include Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in order to provide more grounds and more facilities to host the bid. And it was thought that this bid would be particularly strong, especially as 2030 will mark the 100th anniversary of the World Cup.
And we invented football. Football's coming home.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
To Ireland.
But obviously, while it was a UK and Ireland bids, a lot of the focus has been placed on the English aspect, given the previous bids, and indeed in the 2019 general election, part of the Conservative manifesto was to bid for the 2030 World Cup. Funding was pledged, 2.8 million, and it's been obviously, as mentioned with the previous bids, it has been a major point of pride for the FA to try and bring the World Cup back to England, where the other nations of the UK and Republic of Ireland now dragged in.
So is this just realpolitik then? Have they just basically said, look, we can see we're not going to win, so let's pivot and bid for the Euros instead?
Yes, to a certain extent, based on the reports which originated from the Times and which have been now widely reported elsewhere. There's been a shift and an increasing pessimism that the British and Irish bid would have any chance of success. The indications coming out of UEFA is that they will only back one European bid, and a joint Iberian bid between Spain and Portugal now looks to be the preferred bid. And there's also a general sort of feeling that the nostalgic bring football home bid is actually one that comes from South America.
Yes, because the original World Cup was held in Uruguay 100 years ago. So it would be a sentimental recreation of that if South America got it. Abdul, we all know what a fan you are of patriotism, so I imagine you don't really have a horse in this race. But if you had to choose a country to host the World Cup, where would you choose?
I would choose a place where I can really travel and enjoy a bit of the sun. So Spain and Portugal are both hoping to place a bid. Interestingly, Israel is also hoping to place a bid with Emirates.
Wow, that is interesting. Yeah, politically. And I don't think Israel's ever hosted a large tournament like that before, have they?
No, neither of them has hosted anything larger. Emirates has also always hosted the F1, and we saw what happened in the last one. But there is a bid for both of them. But this will bring a lot of problems for Arabs or Muslims visiting Israel if they want to attend, and whether they would be able to get a visas or not.
Suchandrika, do you think, though, that £2.8 million was a punt worth making? I mean, if Britain had managed to get the World Cup, that would be a big deal for people in the UK.
It's always a bit of a gamble, isn't it? You put in the bid because you want the benefits of all the tourists, for instance, coming over and spending money in the country. So let's just look at a comparison between World Cups and Olympic Games and see which ones bring in more tourists. So during the Rio Olympic Games in 2018, there were 1.2 million visitors. And according to Rio City Hall, 410,000 of them were not from Brazil. So they brought in loads and loads of foreign visitors. According to the last FIFA World Cup in Russia, there were 886,000 tourists. 471,000 of those were foreign tourists. So there were fewer, much fewer. But they tend to come and watch the whole of the World Cup, whereas tourists for the Olympic Games tend to come and watch one or two particular games, don't tend to stay all the way through the tournament and spend money all the way through. So if you talk about audience, both events are watched by about half of the Earth's population. So the World Cup reached 3.2 billion viewers, while the last Olympic Games reached 3.5 billion viewers.
Really? So that's quite interesting, isn't it, Emma? Because I think some people think, of course, football's a big deal all over the world, but in huge countries like the USA, for example, they're basically not interested in it. So it's a bigger deal to have the Olympics. We had the Olympics, but it sounds like no, football is as big a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously this would have been a huge source of pride to bring in the World Cup back to the UK. And for a while it looked like it would be a major push point for the British government. Boris Johnson talked about bringing football home, but in the years since 2019, when this was first put as a manifesto pledge, obviously the world has changed a lot. And it was interesting that in the last week, when this story first broke, the DCMS, Departure of Culture, Media and Sport Committee Chair Julian Knight welcomed the news and said everyone knows that the furore over World Cup bid is a giant expensive vanity project. And you can certainly see why that would be said, because obviously 2.8 million put towards the bid at the early stage to check the viability of bidding. For the 2018 World Cup, the English bid cost £19 million and was knocked out in the first round of voting with just 2 votes from the FIFA committee. So it was a spectacular waste of money. And so obviously this British and Irish bid has been looked at, and it appears to have been decided we don't want to go down this road of financial waste and possible global humiliation on the stage of sports politics.
Or possibly, Abdul, we're not prepared to bribe anybody. I mean, that is the other side, isn't it? It's sometimes presented this by self-loathing Brits as, oh, the whole world hates the UK, that's why we never win these things. But I mean, it's not as if the world loves Qatar, is it? You know, you can see by the countries that have got the World Cup and have been given these big competitions that very often there are obviously, to put it politely, you know, conversations behind the scenes that perhaps aren't necessarily detailed in the pitch.
No, not at all. But what do we say in English? The end justifies the mean. You look at Qatar. Qatar has the population of 2.8 million, is kind of the size of Yorkshire, but they spent 120 billion pounds on this World Cup. 120 billion. They're building state-of-the-art stadiums. They're bringing people. How many people are going to travel to Qatar and bring a lot of money into it? We are not ready to bribe. UK, maybe the government here does not bribe, but we've got something better. We've got a legendary bloke who puts firework up his ass for entertainment. And that's what we watched before the final between Italy and England in Leicester Square. And when I talk about football here with my students in Hong Kong, Everybody knows this guy. I think everybody knows a picture of the ass of this guy, not this guy. But he's legendary. So I think he should be the one who is leading our bid for football. Who doesn't want to see that again?
I think it's fair to say that photo isn't on the front of the prospectus, Emma. What do you think the main argument is, actually? Why should the world back our bid anyway?
Well, it's interesting that a bid for Euro 2028 is seen as having a good chance of success, because obviously you'd think that after the state of the 2020 final at Wembley, with the man with the firework up his backside and everything else that happened around the crowd trouble,
the security breaches, yeah,
exactly, you would think that any chance of England or Britain or Ireland hosting a major football tournament in the near future would be completely impossible. But the UEFA view seems to be that Britain is still very much a viable choice of host, and that the trouble that was seen at the final back in last summer could have happened anywhere and wasn't necessarily the FA's fault. This summer there will be a major match held at Wembley between Italy and Argentina, the champions of Europe versus the champions of South America. So Britain is still apparently seen as a very viable and desirable destination for major football matches, despite the crowd trouble and despite fans inserting fireworks up their backsides.
And Ms. Chakrabarti, you have your hand up at the back of the class. Do you have a question?
Firstly, just thanks, Abdul, for reminding me of that firework guy. I'd forgotten about him. But yeah, I had a question for Emma. I'm wondering, do you think that this expansion to 32 teams is a good thing? Because it sounds to me as though the host country will have a bigger tournament to deal with over more days. We need to have more pitches, have more infrastructure. Will it cost a lot more, or is it not really that big of an expansion?
Well, it's even bigger than that. The World Cup is currently 32 teams and will be 32 teams in Qatar, but from 2026 it's going to be 48 teams, and the 2026 World Cup is going to be held across Canada, the USA and Mexico, majority in the USA, but across the entirety of North America. So it's becoming this huge behemoth in which one country alone, even a country like England or the USA, can't host alone. I mean, the South American bid is currently at 4 nations, Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay and Chile are all part of it, and there's the possibility of Bolivia and Peru as well.
And you get to qualify, don't you, if you host it? So don't all 4 of those countries
Exactly.
get to, yeah. So if it was in the UK, I'm a slightly ridiculous situation where, you know, Wales and Ireland would be qualifying, no questions asked, for the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, Wales and Ireland might take slight exceptions at their automatic place at the World Cup being described as ridiculous, but yes, it's...
Bring it on. I talk as a complete layman.
Absolutely.
It seems to me ridiculous.
For those listening, Olly doesn't mean what he says. But these major tournaments are becoming now so gigantic and so moneyed that they are being held across multiple nations, which makes any sort of bids like this become so huge. There's another potential bid which is coming from the combination of Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, and Romania. You know, these tournaments are now becoming so huge that, and it's so expensive that 3 or 4 countries are having to band together to put them together. And I think that it looks as if the UK and Ireland have decided, with so few guarantees, that so much money would be spent potentially to not even bid in the first place, and then once, if they were awarded it, to spend so much more on top of it.
And in a word, Emma, do you think we're going to get the Euro bid?
Yes, actually, because UEFA still seems to be a big fan of hosting major events in the UK, so I think it looks very positive.
All right, well, with that, I am blowing the whistle on today's tournament. The final scores are Abdulwahab Tahhan 2, Emma Smith 4, Suchandrika Chakrabarti 3, Olly Mann 0. Remember, you can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts. And if you found us today via a Spotify playlist, then please now tap Go to Podcast and then tap Follow. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.